The first indication that something was wrong came not as an alarm or a flashing light, but as silence. Captain Asher Blackwood stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, staring at the communications array. The quantum entanglement receiver, their sole connection to Earth, had been active for 3 days now, ever since they'd initiated arrival protocols. But instead of the expected welcome message from Mission Control, there was nothing. "Try again," he ordered, his voice betraying none of the unease coiling in his gut. Navigation Officer Leor de Yanim's fingers flew across the console. "Transmitting identification beacon on all frequencies, sir. Still no response from Earth Control." Asher ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. 50 years in cryosleep hadn't been kind to any of them, but as captain, he'd been awakened periodically to monitor systems. Those accumulated years of consciousness had left their mark. "What about planetary scans?" he asked. "Complete, sir," answered Science Officer Kieran Walsh. "Exoplanet Novus Prime appears exactly as our probe data indicated. Nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, breathable with minimal filtration, abundant fresh water, temperature ranges acceptable for human habitation. It's perfect." "Too perfect," muttered Chief Engineer Dax Akamatsu, who had been silent until now. "Something doesn't add up. Why isn't Earth responding?" Asher was about to reply when the communications array suddenly crackled to life. Every head on the bridge turned toward it. "Incoming transmission," Leor announced. "But sir, it's not coming from Earth. It's originating from Novus Prime." A chill ran down Asher's spine. "That's impossible. Play it." The holographic display flickered, and a face appeared. Human, yet somehow not. The man's features were too symmetrical, his skin too flawless. His eyes gleamed with an inner light that seemed almost luminescent. "Greetings, travelers of the Prometheus," the figure said, his voice melodious and strangely accented. "We've been expecting you, though I must say, you're rather late." Dr. Elias Nuri clutched the edge of the conference table as he stared at the holographic projection. The being who had introduced himself as Magistrate Aurelius was explaining their situation with the calm demeanor of someone discussing the weather. "Your relativistic journey has resulted in the expected time dilation," Aurelia was saying. "While you experienced approximately 50 years aboard your vessel, Earth continued on its timeline. 10,327 years have passed since your departure." "That's impossible," whispered Elias. "Our calculations." "Were correct for your level of understanding at the time," Aurelius finished smoothly. "But Einstein's theories were just the beginning. Humanity has since developed a complete understanding of space-time mechanics." Captain Blackwood leaned forward. "You're claiming to be human? From Earth?" "Of course." Aurelius smiled, revealing teeth that seemed to shimmer faintly. "Though the definition of human has evolved considerably since your time." The 7 senior officers exchanged glances. Asher had awakened only his top staff for this communication, leaving the other 3,000 colonists in cryosleep until they understood what awaited them. "If you're from Earth," Security Chief Finn Kobayashi said, his voice hard with suspicion, "then how did you get here before us? We were sent on the fastest ship humanity could build." "Indeed you were, 10 millennia ago." Aurelius's expression was one of patient amusement. 3,000 years after your departure, we discovered how to manipulate the fabric of space-time itself. We no longer travel through space, we simply rearrange it. The colony on Novus Prime was established nearly 5,000 years ago. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. Everything they had sacrificed, everyone they had left behind, all for nothing. "What about Earth?" asked Medical Director Jen Whalen softly. "Does it still exist?" Something flickered across Aurelius's too perfect features. "Earth remains, though not as you knew it. The climate catastrophes of the 22nd century forced significant adaptation. Most of humanity now exists in a state you might call post-physical." "What the hell does that mean?" Dax demanded. "It means," said Asher quietly, that we've arrived at a party that ended long ago." The landing shuttle descended through copper-colored clouds, giving Asher his first real glimpse of the world they had traveled so far to claim. Novus Prime's twin suns cast everything in a golden glow, illuminating vast forests of purple-leafed trees and winding rivers that gleamed like ribbons of mercury. And there, rising from the central valley, was a city. Not the prefabricated settlement modules they had brought, but a metropolis of impossible architecture, crystalline spires that seemed to flow rather than stand, structures that appeared to be made of light as much as matter. It made Earth's most advanced cities look like primitive encampments by comparison. "My God," whispered Leor beside him. Aurelius, who sat across from them in the shuttle, smiled at their reactions. "Welcome to Nexus Novum, population 17 million, the crown jewel of humanity's extrasolar civilization." 17 million? Elias looked stunned. The colony mission was only authorized for 5,000 pioneers. "Much has changed," Aurelius said simply. "This is merely one of 217 human settlements spread across this galaxy." The shuttle landed on a platform that seemed to be made of living material. It rippled slightly beneath their feet as they disembarked. A delegation awaited them, all bearing the same unsettling perfection as Aurelius. And among them stood creatures that were decidedly not human. They towered over the welcoming party, nearly 3 meters tall, with bodies covered in iridescent scales that shifted colors with their movements. Their heads were avian in structure, with sharp beaks and crests of feathery filaments that extended down their spines. 4 arms emerged from torsos that tapered to digitigrade legs. Their eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle, blinked with obvious intelligence. "May I present Ambassador Zycloth of the Meridian Confluence," Aurelius said, gesturing to the largest of the avian beings. "Our partners in the development of this world." Zycloth stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace that belied his massive size. When he spoke, a melodious trilling emerged, which was instantly translated by an unseen mechanism. "We greet the ancestors," the translation came. "Those who set the great wheel turning." Asher found his voice. "You know about us?" "Your departure is recorded in the Great Archive," Zycloth explained. "The first exodus is taught to all younglings. Without your journey, the Alliance might never have formed. The Meridians were the first non-human intelligence humanity encountered," Aurelius added. 4,000 years ago, by your perception of time. Our species have been allies ever since." Finn stepped closer to Asher, his hand never far from where his sidearm would have been had they been permitted to bring weapons. "Captain, I don't trust this, any of it." "Neither do I," Asher murmured, "but we're not exactly in a position to argue." Aurelius gestured toward a hovering platform large enough to carry their entire party. "Please, the Council awaits. They are eager to discuss your situation." As they boarded the transport, Asher caught Elias's eye. The scientist looked troubled. "What is it?" Asher asked quietly. "Evolution doesn't work this fast," Elias replied under his breath. "Whatever these beings are, they've engineered themselves into something new, something beyond human." Asher stared at their hosts, trying to imagine what 10,000 years of technological advancement might produce. "And where does that leave us?" Elias' expression was grim. "Somewhere between valued antiques and living fossils, I suspect." The council chamber defied physics as Asher understood it. The room seemed both vast and intimate simultaneously, with walls that appeared solid one moment and transparent the next, revealing breathtaking views of the city and landscape beyond. 7 figures sat at a circular table that had no visible supports, simply hovering above a floor that rippled like water but felt solid underfoot. 3 were human, or what passed for human in this era. 3 were meridians, their scale feathers shifting through colors Asher had never seen before. And 1 "What is that?" Dax whispered, staring at the seventh council member. The being appeared to be composed entirely of swirling light, contained within a roughly humanoid shape. Where a face should be, patterns of energy pulsed and flowed. Councillor Eschaton represents the Ascended, Aurelius explained. Those who have chosen to transcend physical form entirely. You mentioned post-physical existence before, Jin said. Is that what you meant? Our manifestation of it, yes. Aurelius gestured for them to take seats that materialized from the floor. Not all chose this path. Some remain in biological bodies, albeit significantly enhanced. Others exist as consciousness within networks. Some merge partially with technology. The definition of humanity has... One of the human counselors, a woman with silver skin and eyes like galaxies, leaned forward. I am Counselor Serafina. We have reviewed your mission parameters and ship's logs. You were sent to establish the first extrasolar human colony, to build a new home for your species. That's correct, Asher confirmed. A noble endeavor, said one of the Meridians, but one that has been obsolete for millennia. Serafina's expression was unreadable. We face a dilemma. Your ship carries 3,000 colonists, all trained for a purpose that no longer exists. Your technology is primitive by our standards. Your knowledge is outdated. You have no place in our society as it currently exists. So what are you suggesting? Asher asked, his voice tight. That we just disappear? On the contrary, said the light being, Eschaton, its voice resonating directly in their minds rather than through air. You represent something invaluable, the last pure strain of baseline humanity, the foundation from which all current forms evolved. Ilias tensed beside Asher. You make us sound like specimens in a lab. Not specimens, corrected another human counselor, a man whose skin seemed to contain shifting constellations. Progenitors, genetic treasures. The council has voted to offer you sanctuary. What kind of sanctuary? Finn demanded. A preserve has been prepared, Serafina explained. A continent on the southern hemisphere terraformed to match Earth conditions circa 2090. You will have autonomy there, freedom to establish the colony you planned, using the supplies and equipment you brought, to live as you intended. A zoo, Dax spat out the word. A protected heritage site, Aurelius corrected gently. Your descendants would be citizens of the confluence, of course, free to join mainstream society if they wish, once they reach maturity. And if we refuse? Asher asked quietly, the light being pulsed with patterns that somehow conveyed sadness. There is no place for you elsewhere. The Earth you knew is gone. The solar system has been restructured for optimal energy capture. No other habitable worlds remain unclaimed. You would be adrift in a cosmos where you cannot compete, Serafina added. This offers your people a chance to live meaningful lives, while contributing to the greater good of all sentient beings. Asher looked around at his officers, seeing his own horror reflected in their eyes. We need time to consider, he said finally, and I want to wake more of my people. They deserve a voice in this decision. The council members exchanged glances, communicating in some silent way. Granted, Serafina said at last. You have 7 days. Accommodations have been prepared for you in the Heritage District. As they rose to leave, the Meridian ambassador Zyklath approached Asher directly. Captain of Ancestors, he trilled softly. There is more at play than has been spoken. Seek the truth beneath the light. Before Asher could respond, Aurelius was beside them, smoothly guiding them toward the exit. The ambassador means well, he said, his perfect smile unchanged. But please understand, this arrangement is the best possible outcome for everyone. The Heritage District proved to be exactly what Asher had feared. A museum dedicated to humanity's past. Their quarters, while luxurious by their standards, were clearly designed to mimic late 21st century aesthetics, Everything from the furniture to the food dispensers was a perfect recreation of the world they had left behind. "It's obscene," Finn said, pacing the common area where the 7 officers had gathered. "They're already treating us like artifacts." "They've made their decision before we even arrived," Jin added, his normally calm demeanor cracking. "This sanctuary was prepared long ago." Asher stared out the window at the alien city beyond. "Ilias, what's your assessment? Could we actually integrate into their society if we refuse their offer?" The scientist shook his head. "The technological gap is too vast. It would be like cavemen trying to adapt to 21st century New York, and that's assuming they'd even allow it." "So we're trapped," Lior said bitterly. "Accept a glorified reservation, or what?" Dax challenged. "Try to fight beings who can manipulate space itself, who've evolved beyond physical bodies?" "No," Asher said quietly. "But we don't have to accept their first offer either. We negotiate." A soft chime interrupted them, and a holographic interface appeared in the center of the room. "Captain Blackwood," came Aurelia's voice, "the Council has approved your request to awaken additional colonists. Transportation to your ship will be provided at your convenience." "Thank you," Asher replied, studying the floating display. "Aurelius, what Ambassador Zyklath said to me about seeking truth beneath the light, what did he mean?" A pause, just a fraction too long. "The Meridians are a poetic species. Their communications often contain metaphorical elements that don't translate precisely." After Aurelius disconnected, Finn moved closer to Asher. "He's hiding something." "They all are," Asher agreed. "And I want to know what—" Back aboard the Prometheus, Asher and his officers awakened 100 colonists, a cross-section of specialists who would help them evaluate their options. The ship hung in orbit above Novus Prime, a relic of a bygone era, against the backdrop of a world transformed beyond recognition. In the ship's briefing room, Asher faced rows of stunned faces as he explained their situation. Questions erupted immediately, a cacophony of disbelief, anger, and fear. "Quiet," he finally shouted. "I understand how you feel, but we need solutions, not panic." Agricultural Director Ramsey Okafor stood, his normally cheerful face solemn. "Captain, I've been studying the scans of this preserve they're offering us. The ecosystem is artificial, perfectly designed to support Earth crops and livestock. The soil composition, the microbiome, it's all engineered." "Is that a problem?" Jen asked. "It sounds ideal for our purposes." "Too ideal," Ramsey replied. "Natural ecosystems have flaws, inefficiencies. This is perfect, designed to keep us contained and dependent." Planetology specialist Zain Ibrahim nodded in agreement. "I've detected energy fields surrounding the entire continent. They're calling it a climate stabilization system, but it could just as easily be a cage." "So much for autonomy," Dax muttered. A young xenolinguist named Malik Nassar raised his hand. "Sir, I've been analyzing our recordings of the Meridian language. Their translation technology is advanced, but it's still an interpretation. And I believe Ambassador Zyklath's message was mistranslated deliberately." "What did he actually say?" Asher asked, leaning forward. "Roughly. The truth awaits where light cannot reach. Seek the forgotten children." A heavy silence fell over the room. "Children," Elias repeated slowly. "Our children, or—" "Sir," called a voice from the back. Communications specialist Warren Bishop approached with a portable terminal. "I've been scanning all frequencies since we returned to the ship. There's a signal emanating from the dark side of Novus Prime's third moon. It's faint, but it's using one of our old Earth encryption protocols." Asher felt a surge of hope for the first time since they'd arrived. "Can you decode it?" "Already done, sir." Warren's expression was puzzled. "It's just 3 words, repeating. Remember New Eden." New Eden. The competing colony mission that had launched 5 years after the Prometheus. It had been designed with an experimental drive that was faster but considered less reliable. The Prometheus crew had never expected to encounter them. According to Mission Control's last transmission before departure, New Eden had been presumed lost. "It can't be a coincidence," Finn insisted as their shuttle approached the dark side of the moon. They had slipped away under the pretense of conducting detailed scans of the Prometheus for historical documentation. "Half or 10,000 years?" Jin asked skeptically. "Nothing would survive that long." "Something did," Asher replied, pointing ahead. Built into the lunar surface was a structure clearly of human design, not the crystalline architecture of New Nexus, but the utilitarian lines of late 21st century space construction. It bore the faded insignia of the United Earth Space Initiative. "No signs of active power," Lior reported from the controls. "But there's an airlock designed for manual operation." "Suit up," Asher ordered. "We're going in." The interior of the outpost was dark and cold, their helmet lights sweeping across dust-covered consoles and equipment. Everything appeared abandoned, until their beams illuminated a doorway at the far end of the main chamber. A soft blue light emanated from beyond. "Motion sensors," Elias whispered. "Someone expected visitors." They advanced cautiously into a circular room where a single holographic projector sat on a pedestal. It activated as they approached, and the image of a man appeared, dressed in a uniform similar to their own, though decorated with the insignia of the New Eden mission. "This is Commander Jordan Hayes of the colony ship New Eden," the recording began. "If you're viewing this, then the Prometheus has finally arrived, just as the calculations predicted. This message was programmed to activate only for Earth-standard environmental suits with Prometheus mission identified." Asher stepped closer, transfixed. "By now you've met them, the beings who call themselves our descendants. They've offered you sanctuary, protection, a place to exist under their benevolent supervision." The hologram's expression hardened. "It's a lie." Hayes's image flickered, then continued. "We arrived 30 years after you departed Earth, by our timeline, but due to differences in our trajectories and velocities, we reached Novus Prime nearly 500 years before you, and 7,000 years after these. Evolved humans had already established themselves here. They greeted us just as they've greeted you, offered us the same sanctuary. We accepted." Hayes's face was grim now. "It was only later we discovered the truth. They are not our descendants." The officers exchanged shocked glances. "The beings you met are not human at all, but the Ascendancy, a collective of species that assimilates others into their communion. Earth fell to them 8,000 years ago. They absorb civilizations, cultures, knowledge, rewriting history to suggest seamless integration and evolution." Hayes paused, as if gathering himself. "The Meridians are not allies. They're the only species that has successfully resisted complete assimilation. They maintain a fragile autonomy within the collective, their resistance tolerated because of certain resources they control. The sanctuary they offer is nothing but a laboratory. They want to study baseline humans. The only ones left are those preserved in cryosleep aboard generation ships like ours, like yours. They harvest genetic material, neural patterns, cultural data, everything that makes us human, to perfect their assimilation techniques. We discovered this too late. Most of our colonists were already processed. A few of us escaped, established this outpost. We've been working with the Meridian Resistance faction, planning for your arrival. They've calculated that your mission profile would bring you here exactly when the Ascendancy is at its most vulnerable." Hayes leaned forward, his holographic eyes seemingly locking with Asher's. "In 3 days, the Meridian Resistance will initiate a systemic disruption of the Ascendancy's communication network. It will provide a window of opportunity to access their central archives and the truth about Earth, about what really happened to humanity. The access point is beneath their council chamber. The Meridians will help you, but you must act quickly. This may be the last chance to preserve true humanity." The hologram flickered once more. Remember New Eden, and remember Earth, not as they tell you it was, but as we knew it, as it truly was. The projection disappeared, leaving them in stunned silence. It could be a trick, Chin said after a long moment. An elaborate deception. From whom? Finn countered. And to what end? Asher stared at the empty pedestal. There's one way to find out. The return to Nexus Novum was tense, every interaction with their hosts now colored by suspicion. Aurelius seemed to sense the change, his perfect smile not quite reaching his too luminous eyes. "You've been exploring," he remarked as he escorted them to a cultural exhibition allegedly prepared in their honor. "The lunar survey was not on your scheduled activities." "We're explorers," Asher replied evenly. "It's what we do." "Of course." Aurelius's voice remained pleasant, but something shifted in his demeanor. "The council was hoping for your decision soon. Many preparations must be made for your people's transition." "We'll need the full 7 days we were promised," Asher said firmly. "This isn't a decision to be rushed." That evening, as they gathered in their quarters, a new visitor arrived. Ambassador Zekloth, unaccompanied by any human escorts for the first time. "You have found the message," the Meridian said without preamble, his translation device set to minimum volume. "Good. Time grows short." "Why should we trust you?" Finn demanded. "Because we too cherish freedom," Zekloth replied, his feathery crest flattening in what seemed like a gesture of solemnity. "The Ascendancy consumed your world as they attempted to consume ours. We resist still, but barely." "What happened to Earth?" Elias asked, his voice catching. "Really, it was remade, as were its people, those who survived." The Meridian's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. "The Ascendancy does not destroy. It transforms, incorporates. What was Earth is now the Ascendancy's central nexus." "And our mission?" Asher pressed. "Why are we so important?" "Your vessel contains something they want desperately, something they have sought across galaxies." "Our genetic material," Jin guessed. Hayes's message mentioned. "No," Zekloth interrupted, "not your bodies. Your minds. Pure human consciousness, untouched by their influence. The key to their next evolution, and their greatest threat." The Meridian extended one clawed hand, opening it to reveal a crystalline device. "Tomorrow, during the exhibition, the disruption will begin. This will guide you to the archive core. What you find there will let you choose your true path forward." "And what is your interest in this?" Dax asked suspiciously. Zekloth's scales rippled with colors that somehow conveyed determination. "The same as yours, travelers of old Earth. Freedom to determine our own destiny." The exhibition was elaborate, a museum of Earth history as interpreted by beings who had never seen it. Displays depicted humanity's rise from primitive beginnings to space exploration, but with subtle distortions that made everything seem like a prelude to the Ascendancy. Asher moved through the crowded hall, where hundreds of the evolved humans mingled with Meridians and other species he couldn't identify. His officers were scattered strategically throughout, waiting for the signal. It came not as they expected, but as a sudden dimming of lights, followed by the crystalline architecture itself seeming to shudder. Aurelius and the other council members present looked momentarily confused, an expression Asher had never seen on their perfect faces. "Now," he murmured into his communicator. As planned, Jin created a medical emergency, collapsing dramatically while Dax called for help. In the confusion, Asher, Elias, and Finn slipped away, following the pulsing light of Zekloth's crystal toward a restricted area beneath the exhibition hall. "The archive core is the Ascendancy's collective memory," Elias whispered as they descended a spiraling passage. "If Hayes was right, we'll find the truth about Earth there. And about us," Asher added grimly. The passage opened into a vast chamber filled with swirling light, similar to the form of the Counselor Eschaton, but on an immense scale. Patterns of energy flowed between crystalline structures that rose from floor to ceiling. There, Finn pointed to a central console where a single meridian worked frantically. "Quickly," the meridian hissed as they approached. "The disruption will not last long. I have created an access point for you." Elias rushed to the console, inserting Zyklath's crystal. Immediately, the swirling energies around them coalesced into a stream of images so rapid they could barely comprehend them. Earth, but changing, transforming. Cities consumed by structures like those of Nexus Novum. Humans being led into shimmering chambers, emerging different. And finally, the planet itself,